Hello, my dear audience, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Micro. As always, I am so happy to be here with you. And if this is your first time listening to the podcast, well, welcome. Thank you for choosing Let's Talk Micro as your podcast. I hope you enjoy it. And this episode is part of a series that we do where people from the microbiology and medical lab sciences field, or better said, in laboratory medicine, and they joined the podcast to talk about their careers, what inspired them to get into this field. They talk about the challenges, things they have liked. They also talk about if they now work in a different profession within the field, what made them choose that. And today's guests, they have been guests of the podcast before. One of them is Andrea Prinzi. She's the co-host of the AMR series with me here in Let's Talk Micro. And the other one is Lisa Parlich, where she did an episode about urine cultures. So let's go ahead and listen to the episode. Well, not too long ago, we started doing in the Let's Talk Micro podcast a series and we started with microbiologists, and I definitely want to open it later on to other lab professionals. But we get people from like medical lab scientists, or they're involved somehow in microbiology, and they come to the podcast and talk about their careers, challenges, their starts, where are they now? So, what motivated them to start this career or stay in it? So, this is the next episode in that series, and I am very happy as always. I get to chat with people from the field. So, today I have two guests, and both of them, one was a guest before in the podcast where we did an episode about urine cultures, and her name is Lisa Parlich. And I'm very happy because with me today, I get to chat with Andrea Prinzi. As you know, she's the co-host on the AMR series. Always a great time talking to Andrea, so I'm very excited about this episode. So, Lisa and Andrea, welcome to Let's Talk Micro.
Love being here.
Thanks for having us.
What a pleasure. So, at some point in time, both of you have kind of introduced yourself to the podcast. You did it in your episode, Lisa, and you kind of done it a few times, Andrea. So, but let's go ahead and start. For those of you that are in the audience that are just tuning in, can you do like a quick introduction about what you do and anything else that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, so I am currently a field medical director of U.S. Medical Affairs at BMRU, which is an in vitro diagnostics company for microbiology and infectious diseases. Long before that, I was a clinical laboratory scientist at Children's Hospital Colorado, did some MPH training in epidemiology at Colorado School of Public Health, and then got my PhD in clinical and translational science at University of Colorado. And I do a mix of all of those things in my day-to-day work now. So I do uh, medical education, clinical outcomes research for in vitro diagnostics, so evidence generation, as we call it. I work a lot with other clinical colleagues in the field to understand what's going on out there in micro, what needs to happen, what isn't happening, et cetera. And I also do lots of science communication.
Cool. And I'm Lisa. I was a medical laboratory scientist for about 5.5 years. And then I went and got my MPH and transitioned into infection prevention. And that's where I have been since 2020. So, not as involved with the lab, but they are partners. And I do get to use my micro knowledge pretty often on the job, which is pretty cool. So, that's where I'm at today.
Well, welcome again, and it's always fascinating to see how, how much we can do in this field, and all three of us, we got our starts in the lab, and I'm still doing it along with many other things. But it's always so many ways that we can go and still contribute in some way or another. So it's always great hearing about people's different career paths. So let's start with the first question, and I'll start with you, Lisa. So we all have a reason for why we chose this field. Maybe we found it by accident, or we wanted to get a degree in something, or so what led or inspired you to choose this field?
So, I kind of stumbled into it, to be honest. I spent my freshman year of undergrad at Colorado State University, um, and I was hopefully going to get into veterinary medicine. But then after my freshman year, I ended up transferring to the University of North Dakota, which does not offer veterinary medicine, which sounds kind of counterintuitive to my plans, but I was a college athlete and I kind of picked an athletic program over the academic program. So I had to come up with a new life plan. So I had this book of all the majors that UND offered, and I had no idea where to start. But the only subject that I liked in school growing up was science. So I took that book and I opened it up to the Bachelor of Science section. And decided that the first major that I land on with my finger is going to be the one that I decided to do. So I closed my eyes and I started flipping through the pages and I counted to three and then I stopped on a page and I landed on the clinical laboratory science page. And I read the description and what it involved. And I was like, oh, well, this sounds pretty cool. And I went with it. And it turned out to be a really good decision, even though it probably wasn't the best or the smartest way to do it. But it worked out. And when I was doing the program, I completely fell in love with both micro and blood bank. And I decided that as I graduated that I wanted to go into either micro or blood bank. And micro it was. So I did that. I graduated and went straight into micro.
Yeah, I think for and that's very, very common sometimes, like a lot of people that a lot of microbiologists they find themselves liking, also blood bank when they went to school, and it's probably the whole, mystery solving, the amount of knowledge and all the things. It makes it a little different, so and exciting, right? So finding what that bug is and getting to the bottom of that, or finding what that antibody is. So yeah, so that's definitely very common to see that. Oh, but wow, you definitely took a chance, and wow, it's amazing, and it paid off. Oh, yeah, so good. What about you, Andrea? What led you or inspired you to choose this field?
Well, first of all, I love that, Lisa. And I think about this a lot when I've done a few different, career discussions over the last few years, and I think it's always funny and interesting to hear where people that ended up in medical laboratory science found it. It's almost never like I was in an undergrad program and I heard about it from my professors. It's never I was at some, recruiting event and I was really interested in it. It's seemingly, I mean, it's not always, I'm sure, but a lot of the time it's like people kind of stumbled into it and found out that it was this great career. And my story is similar. I think that's kind of unfortunate, right? Like it kind of shows you how much more advocacy we need to do to get people into this field. Because when people find it, I think they realize what a wonderful profession it is. It was similar. I was an undergrad in biology at University of Colorado, Denver, and was in bio. So yay, Colorado! Um, I was a biology major, so of course I thought I was pre med, like everyone else. And I was doing minors in chemistry and public health, and always, always, always loved infectious disease. I was a very nerdy child, which I'm sure Luis is so surprising to you. I was, I always like was in love with microbiology from a young age and fascinated with it. So I knew I was going to probably go into something like that. Um, but I was working full time when I was in an undergraduate program, trying to pay for school, help take care of my dad who was sick at the time, and was just taking jobs, to make money, and had decided to get any job I could find um, in a laboratory setting or a hospital setting so I could start getting experience in a clinical setting to apply for medical school. So I ended up getting a job on the night shift at a reference laboratory, um, basically processing pap smears for the cytopathology lab at night from like 6 p.m. to 2:30 in the morning. And then I would get up in the morning and go to classes and do this 5 days a week. And, after doing that for a little while, I thought, "I really wanna get into the hospital because I wanna be more in a hospital setting and just see what I can find." And so I applied to the first job I could find that had lab in the title, and it was a laboratory assistant, position between anatomical pathology and microbiology at Children's Colorado. And, over my time there, my boss actually in microbiology was like, "Hey, have you ever heard about this profession? Medical laboratory science, it's what all these people you're working around every day are doing, and if you want to learn it, we can kind of set up a program for you here where if you can self-teach yourself the didactic material, you can shadow the techs on the bench when you're done with your work for the day. We can do this for a year and a half. And if you've got what you need to sit for the board exam, you can do that." So I'm actually self-taught. I memorized all of Kohnemann's diagnostic textbook of microbiology, and then sat with really amazing senior techs after I was done working for the day for a year and a half, and sat and was able to get certified for the ASCP certification. And of course, as soon as I learned what the job entailed, I absolutely loved it. And I stayed in the lab for another like almost 12 and a half years after that. So yeah, again, kind of serendipitous, kind of, and then I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but to where I got today has been a very interesting journey because certainly it wasn't where I thought I would end up at all. So yeah, that's how I got into the lab.
That's incredible. Self-taught too, because this is not an easy subject, any of them. That's incredible.
I think,
You have brains.
thank you. You know what I think it is? It's like I wouldn't recommend that to anyone because I think the structured program is the best way to do this. But I think I was so scared I wouldn't get it right that I just really I went hard, and I really, really, really got deep in it. And I'm certified just in micro, so I didn't learn all the other areas, which certainly helped. I mean, micro gets really deep as it is, but it was nice that I wasn't trying to teach myself all of the disciplines. It was just micro. So, and then of course, lots and lots of help from lots of really brilliant people around me. So, sort of self-taught, but they helped a lot. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Thank you.
Wow, on top of that, Kahneman's, which is such a light read, right?
It's only like 1,200 pages. It's no big deal. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
no big deal.
I remember the first time, yeah, when I was teaching, and they floated the idea of, yeah, maybe let's use, Kahneman's. And when I saw that thing, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's such a huge book. It's like,
It
so
is.
what?
It's a
Yeah.
good text. It's a very good text.
Okay. And so for the audience, and we did an episode about this. So you took the categorical certification for microbiology and ASCP, which is, if anyone listening, if you want to tune into one of the back episodes with Amanda Harrington, she goes over the details about that. And now we're seeing more MLS programs that are actually coming up with like certificates where people can take, sometimes I think it's like 5 or 6 classes, and definitely microbiology. And then there's the one episode that I did that's also like in I think it's hematology. And so now you're getting the certificates where you can go in and take those 6 classes. It takes maybe like a year, do like a clinical rotation, and then you're eligible to sit for a categorical certification. So we're definitely coming up with many ways to get people in the lab, which is really good. We need the text and stuff like that. Okay, well, Andrea, you mentioned your first job, right? So you talk about your first job. So Lisa, when you completed your MLS program, and what was your first job in the lab?
So because I did my clinical rotations down in Arizona, but I was looking to move back home in Wisconsin. So it's kind of where I'm from. Um, kind of rural, very limited. But I found a hospital system that had microbiology position open, and I thought it was destiny. I was like, this is it. This is what I need. If I don't get it, I'm going to be devastated. But fortunately, I was able to land a job. This first one I applied to, it's was with a system with at the time I believe had maybe 7 or 8 hospitals in the system. And the micro lab was the core lab for that system. So we serviced all these hospitals and all of the clinics throughout the system. So it was a relatively large lab. With a lot of input and output. So it was a very, very busy job, which was good, which is what I was looking for. So it was perfect. So this core lab, and it ended up growing while I was there for a couple of years too. So much so that it kind of expanded. But yeah, I got into the core lab with this huge health system that I grew up on. And it was perfect. It was everything I asked for. So everything worked out in my favor. I was very fortunate.
Lisa, a lot of the things that happen to you do sound like destiny. I'm gonna be honest. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is great. Everything is working out as she planned.
I will say
I
I've
love
been
that.
pretty fortunate so far. I've had a lot of things just kind
That's
of
so
fortunately happen. I'm very, very, very blessed for that.
very,
So
very cool.
yeah, it worked
I
out.
love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it too. It sounds like a great story. I kind of wish like mine had gone that way, and I think it's just like I always mention in episodes and things like that. Like if this was a relationship. I feel like, like microbiology sometimes, doesn't love me back as much as or so. I haven't felt that. Yeah, it's
Understandable.
like it's been a little bit of an uphill battle, but I am still, grateful of all the things, of course, that being in this job have brought me. Like talking here with you and doing things like this. So still not the best love story, not even a love story. It's just I've been obsessed with this thing and I've been chasing it for a long time. So
It's a long poem, Luis.
right, yeah.
I love that.
So so Lisa, you mentioned so that you work in so you did core lab work or
Mhm.
yeah, and then
No, it was the core micro lab, so I didn't work in the general, if
okay.
that makes sense.
So you haven't
Yeah.
have you worked in any other areas outside of micro?
No, and I haven't. And when I got into it, I was kind of kicking myself because I thought, maybe I should start in a general lab and kind of do a little bit of everything and then move to a micro base. Because, I thought, well, what if some year down the road I want to move to a different hospital system or transition? Like I should have that background knowledge. But nope, I just jumped into micro and I stayed there and it was great. So no other experience. But I'm okay with that.
Okay. Yeah, and then sometimes, if you know what you like, and I do recommend if you're unsure of what you like when you get into this field in medical lab sciences, it's very advisable go in and maybe do a little bit of core lab and work around and see what you want. And it also makes you more hireable, and if you want to make the switch, let's say from micro to another area, I don't know what would you ever do that, leave
Mm-mm.
microbiology. But I respect, so if you want to do that, it's a little more difficult if you've been working in micro 10, 15 years, and then you're going to apply for a job in hematology or chemistry, and you're competing with someone that has rich experience in those areas. But if you know that that's what you like, of course, it's just there's no need to do anything else. I mean, if you like it. So maybe I don't know if regarding this question, since you haven't worked in another area, maybe in the lab, do you have like where you always let's say, do you always work on the bench, or do you get to work in maybe another position in micro as a, let's say, a lead tech or a supervisor?
I did not. I was on the bench, but I was the key op or the key operator for um, MALDI-TOF for reproductives and for blood cultures. And then I was on our technical advisory committee with our tech specs. So I kind of got a little bit of the background in that, which was really helpful. And I think that really helped with my current job just to have a little bit more admin experience, I suppose. But no, I was just a bench tech, just trying to get as many hours as possible, which was not hard. We always had hours available, but just trying to work as much, and I did a lot of training and stuff too. So I was really kind of a hands-on kind of person, I guess. But yeah.
Okay. And then you, Andrea, right? You were a lead at some point in time, or
Yeah, I was a senior tech for several years and took on some interesting responsibilities that were awesome. Like I was uh, responsible for coordinating and doing the training in our medical laboratory science rotation for students that came through, which I loved, and then did a lot of employee training. And then my favorite part was I got to early in my career there, one of the more senior techs had trained me on this course that we were offering to clinicians from the microbiology side. And then I got to kind of revamp that and deliver that consistently for years, where we would get the infectious disease fellows to come down for 2 days and do this like 2 hour, 2 or 3 hour micro course with me 2 days in a row, where we would teach them about what we were doing in the lab and then what the results would mean for them. And they loved it. And it was a great way to build relationships at our hospital and get people to interact with the lab a little more readily. Loved that. And then got to help run a bunch of programs on campus too. So the physician assistant microbiology course, or there was like a field training course for folks that were going to go to lower middle income countries and do parasitology. So stuff like that. Lots of fun. And then lots of stuff I didn't love so much, right? Like QC auditing and, validations, which can be fun or can be a nightmare depending on what you're validating. So, yeah, stuff like that.
It's nice to it's kind of fun to share your passion with others, right? And teach them. And oh, I mean, I didn't have that role, obviously, but when we did have somebody to train or we had students, I'm like, "I'll do it. I want it. I'll do it." So I get it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I feel like folks, especially, I mean, training other employees is wonderful too, because there's so much to learn. But then those that don't work in the lab, they have truly no clue what's going on down there. So it's such a great opportunity to get people to understand what the lab is doing, which is very enlightening. 9 times out of 10 for people. 10 times out of 10, I'm going to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I did got involved too with students and doing when they do their clinicals and doing bench training, and that's why I quickly realized that I loved it, and which led me to teaching. But yeah, I did enjoy that whole thing about explaining everything and going over, okay, this is went over the policy, and then getting like like super nerd about talking about the the CLSI and the ASM books and going deep into the package inserts. And I think a lot of people appreciate it. Not always everyone. Every now and then I will hear right through the grapevine, it's like Lewis just gave me a package insert. I'm like, I just wanted to, for you to understand how the tests work and all the limitations that it can have. But it's always like, but overall, it's definitely a great experience, right? Sharing your knowledge, and it's just those of us that that like to educate and teach is a very satisfying feeling and rewarding. And not only that, when you're training someone and then you see them come up with their own system and then they start reading things on their own and coming up, it's just like wow, like it's amazing. I work now with several techs that they were my students in micro, so it's kind of nice seeing that process from student to now peers. So it's very cool.
Get to
So
watch them grow into our little lab techs.
yeah, I think I have like there's like four classes out there that they're professionals now. Yeah, I think I'm on season 5 right now, if it was a show. So I've been doing it for since 2019. Um, yeah, and just for the audience, sometimes you might hear terms like senior tech or lead tech. I think some facilities sometimes they might use them a little bit interchangeably. So it's just something. So like years ago, like I was a senior tech. Now my title is lead tech. So sometimes it might be, one place might use one or the other. So okay, so overall, and some about regarding your experiences, and both of you, they are in microbiology. So obviously, you have mentioned that you like the training, right? The education, getting involved in some things. So what other things maybe you have liked, or what challenges have you faced? And we'll start with you, Andrea.
I would say, I think my absolute favorite thing, that actually I think led to my additional training down the road in my work now for sure, was I was very fortunate to work at a center where we had a wonderful stewardship team, and I worked so closely with a lot of the clinicians. And so if they had a research project that was tying in microbiology, I got to be involved in those. I absolutely loved that. It really was a great introduction to more like clinical, translational research, or stewardship focused research in the acute care setting. I loved that. I loved going to rounds every day, and then I really loved doing the education piece. So those were my favorite parts. I think that some parts of the lab can just be so challenging, and just some of the things that exist in the laboratory space, for various reasons, I think can be hard. So, an underappreciation for the job, that career and the people that do this career are so talented and so intelligent and doing truly crucial work. And that's just, if you're in that role, sometimes you're like, oh, are we seen? Are we appreciated? That can be really challenging, I think. And I struggled with that a lot throughout my career, just, for I felt very appreciated my whole career, but I think seeing it, how it plays out for others in other settings, I felt very fortunate again to be very linked in with our clinicians. And so they really appreciated us, but I think that can be really challenging. And then sometimes just like, the receiving bench, like specimens come in and you're doing all this rapid fire stuff. Everything on the receiving bench when I was working it was, a stat, and you're getting so overwhelmed, and it's just you're getting completely annihilated with this volume. At least, I know it's different everywhere, but at least for me, it was like the front bench was where the CSFs were coming down with, the super fast turnaround time where you're doing all your plating and gram staining and reading the gram stain and calling, and your multiplex PCRs are coming off at the same time, and your blood cultures are coming off positive at the same time, and you're kind of in a million places. That bench for me was always a challenge. I loved to sit back on the miscellaneous bench and look at a wound culture and read on the patient's history and figure out what I was doing at my own pace that day. The receiving bench was my least favorite. Also, I'm terrible. I can't decide if I'm worse at mycobacteriology or mycology. I think I'm worse at mycology, but not great at either. I did all of the disciplines in the lab and was not the best at mycology. So I thought it was the coolest. It is hard. I thought it was the coolest, but I just really wasn't very good at it.
It's hard.
How about you, Lisa? What else have you liked or challenges that you face while in the lab?
I'll kind of feed off of what Andrea was saying a little bit. Is I 100% agree. It's chaotic. It's so chaotic, and for example, your stat CSF, you go, you set it up on the biofire, and then there's another one. It's like, oh, I could have just done this at the same time, but you came 3 seconds later, and it's just back and forth, and the blood culture machine's going. It's just truly chaotic, and it really can take a toll on a person. So I understand that fully, how stressful it can be. But also, just kind of with healthcare everywhere, just staffing shortages and employee burnout was something that I really had a challenge with. It's I think we can all relate to that on some level. And just kind of what we touched on a little bit is the constant turnover. So you're always hiring new people. You're taking your time, your tech resources, and efforts used to train them, and then they're there for 3 months and then they leave. That was a lot too. So it is exhausting, but I will say what I enjoyed while I was there was um, I really this might sound a little nerdy, but just kind of the investigative aspect of it, I guess, and the critical thinking used. It's not just what people may think. You're not just going in, plugging away for a couple hours and going home. Like you're really, really putting a lot of work into these cultures and making them make sense and making sure that they're correct. And sometimes it was a little monotonous, or it's E. coli, E. coli, E. coli from the urine cultures. But every once in a while, or more often, you get something really cool and different, and you get to use your brain. And I really liked that about micro, and I think that's why a lot of people who go into micro like micro and blood bank, because it is that critical thinking aspect. Um, so there's that, and then also just a little bit separate from that is the people. Um, I really enjoyed we all know lab people are very special people. We're different individuals, but I really enjoy the people that I worked with, and even today, even though 98% of the people that I worked with are also no longer in the lab, we still take time to go see each other every few months and go out for lunch or something. But it's just kind of the lab family is a very special family. And so I really enjoyed that throughout my lab career too.
Definitely, and you mentioned the yeah, it can get sometimes very overwhelming because of the volume, and I discussed this before, and sometimes compared to other areas, you're a little bit of a bind because not everyone has the same training, and you're in this large facility, and for example, in my facility, I was looking at the pending log for urines between all the shifts and everything. There were like 500 urines. So you imagine, and then you're one person, maybe you get over 101 shift or 150. So you're going through each plate, and then no one has the training to take over for you. So you're basically stuck. So it can get very overwhelming. I think for years, I try to like put on like super speed and try to, it's like, I don't want to have another long day. And then, but that led me to like a lot of frustration, and things seem to continue going wrong. The more I try to rush, more things went wrong. And lately I just embrace it, and I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna make it home on time today. It's gonna be a 12-hour day, so I'll have my dinner late. So just get one thing at a time and do it. But yeah, I can get, and those benches, I was in a job where the setup and micro was, so you had one person working and you were reading cultures, and then you had to do the rapid testing and things like that. So you were okay looking at one wound culture, and then you will hear rapid COVID. So you will have to get up, So my brain just felt like it was just split. So it was like a lot. So it's just
A lot of task switching. That's a great point. You have to be very good at task switching. Um, yes, and I feel yes, to your point, you have to be on your feet all day long, like, not only physically on your feet, but also you have to be ready, to handle all the specimens are important, but, I mean, you have to be able to switch over to the next thing and do it well all day long. And to Lisa's point, it's not just everything is not fully automated. And even if something's automated, there's a lot of interpretive work that goes into these, right? Like making sure that stuff gets reported out correctly or communicated correctly. Um, so that can be so hard with the volume.
And then you finally get in a groove, and then you get a call from the physician on the floor wanting to add on susceptibility testing or something like that. There's just always something to throw you off. Yeah.
yeah. And if you're like a lead or a supervisor, like you're not invisible, so everyone's asking you questions, and maybe you think you're about to finish. All of a sudden, someone comes with some sort of problem that you have to stop your work and get in and solve it. Um, so I don't know, and you mentioned turnaround times, and I was just curious. It's a little bit dorky, but when it comes to the turnaround times, did you ever in your careers like you were so excited, like you're so busy, and think that you're meeting the turnaround time? You put the result in and you forget to send it or save it.
Been there.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, I'm amazing. I'm doing 10 things, but that CSF, I got it done in 45 minutes. And the next thing you know, the phone call, where's my CSF? And I'm like, it's right there on the screen. I'm like, oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you're not
All good.
alone. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So obviously, both of you are doing something different than when you started in the lab. So let's start with, with Lisa, So what led you to your current position?
So, when I first got into the micro lab, I thought I was a very introverted person, and I was excited to be in the lab just minding my own. Um, and the more I worked, I was like, I kind of want to work with other people and outside of the lab. And I still wanted to, do something that had an impact on patient care. But I also kind of wanted to be outside of the walls of the lab and I wanted to broaden my horizon. So that's how I got into infection prevention. I ended up a colleague of mine, actually, she was also thinking of switching her career at the same time. And we were chatting, and we just thought of infection prevention mainly because we had a run in with an infection preventionist in our lab. Well, we had like a TB exposure. So that's kind of how we found out about the career. But I ended up job shadowing her and really enjoying it. And I was planning on getting my master's degree anyways. So um, I worked on my MPH, and um, as time progressed, I really decided that I really wanted to do infection prevention because, again, I for some reason I just became like the kind of person that wanted to work with other people and be an extrovert. Um, and like I said, I just wanted to get more experience with other disciplines too. So I finished my MPH and started looking for infection prevention jobs, and it it is a good fit. I miss micro so much, and it still holds a very special place in my heart. And I go down and visit our own micro lab as much as I can. Be like, "Hey, you guys got anything cool today? Can I look at anything?" Um, but I'm kind of in a place now where I do get to work with the surgeons and the physicians and supply chain and EVS, and I kind of got to broaden out a little bit. So while I really do miss micro, I am in a place that suits me better, I suppose. So yeah, that's how I found it.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we want to find that thing that is fulfilling, and at the same time, it's more compatible with us. And this is the reality. It's great work, but sometimes, especially with the life work balance, it can be affected. The long hours at the hospital, and some people, they're okay with working the bench for 30 years, and it's very respectable and admirable. We're all doing great work, but yeah, at the end of the day, we choose what we like to do and what's best for us and our family. So, but yeah, so what about you, Andrea? After conquering condiments and doing many years in the lab, right? What?
Yeah, so my story is actually going to sound kind of similar because I almost went the same exact route. This was in, let's see, it was 2012. I had been in the lab at that point for maybe 4 years and was loving the work, but was again working really closely with the infection preventionist and the ID team. And I was like, man, infection prevention seems really cool. And one thing I'll say is I think you can never go wrong starting a career as a clinical microbiologist ever, like in the hospital laboratory or in a clinic, um, because those skills transfer to so many other job roles, and you literally have a skill set few others have truly, and you bring a very important perspective to all these other roles and responsibilities. So that's one thing I'll say. Um, and I had known other microbiologists who had gone into infection prevention, and I was like, okay, I know I'm interested in public health. I minored in it. I'm really interested in epidemiology, but I think I might want to go into infection prevention. So I'm going to go get my master's in public health. I'm going to choose a focus of epidemiology, and I'm going to pick infection prevention and control people from my hospital to be my mentors on my thesis project. And then maybe I'll just roll right into that work. And so loved my MPH program, learned a ton. That's actually where I started to fall in love with epidemiologic research methods, which we'll come back to. Um, but lots of people actually don't know this about me. My thesis project was focused on surgical spine infections in the pediatric spine OR, looking at is there any way we can see if there's something going on with the environmental hygiene in the room that might be contributing to post-surgical spine infections. And so I would go in the very early morning. I would collect samples from all over the room. I would watch the surgery be done. I would count how many times people touched things and who came and went. Then I would collect samples again right after surgery. Then I would collect after they did a turnover. I did this all day for months and months and months and months while still working. And finished the project, loved it, thought it was so cool, and was like, I shadowed an infection preventionist, and I'm like, this is so cool and so important, but I just think I would really miss like the diagnostics piece in the lab. So I think I'm going to stay in the lab, but I'm so happy I got the MPH, and I'm just going to continue to apply what I learned from that, and maybe go a little further. And so then I continued to work in the lab for, let's see, I graduated in 2014, and so then I worked for at least 4 more years in the lab as a microbiologist. Went and got my specialty certification at that time through ASCP. Um, was like planning on staying in the lab, but was noticing that I had a lot of interest in the clinical research piece. I really liked some of the stuff my ID doctor and PharmD colleagues were doing. And they had started a relatively new program on my campus that was for clinical and translational science. And I was interested in a PhD because I was starting to kind of bust out of this box I was in a little bit in the lab. There was only so much I could do, and I thought about getting a PhD, but I really didn't want to go get a PhD in microbiology, for example, because I was already very good at microbiology. I wanted to go get a PhD in something that I wasn't good at. Um, and that would kind of round my skills out more. So this program was really interesting because it was very clinical, and they actually had not taken any medical laboratory scientists before I applied. And I actually was rejected at the first pass because they were a little concerned about what I was going to do with it. All of their students were MDs or PharmDs or PAs, and they didn't feel that I had the funding or the trajectory really to take a clinical and translational science PhD somewhere. And my infectious disease MD bestie at the time, he was like, "Oh, no, no, no. You go back in there. You go back in there and you tell them that this is a very different perspective that needs to be, in this program, and you have great ideas and whatever." So I did that. I got into the program, and then it ended up being this phenomenal program that has really catapulted my career in a direction that I love. I have learned so many great clinical stewardship focused research things. So mostly I switched because I was interested in doing a little more in the clinical research space, did not feel I had the training or skills to do that. And so specifically went for like the hardest at the time PhD I could find for me to try to get some skills I absolutely did not have. And it was a journey, right? Because I felt a bit alone through the program. I didn't have anyone really like me in the program, but made a lot of great friends and learned a tremendous amount. And both my mentors were clinicians. And so I kind of grew up with this very, I'm a laboratorian, but then got a lot of my advanced training from clinicians. So I do think like both quite a bit. And I think that's been a really great skill set to get. So it really wasn't because I wasn't happy. I think I could have been a medical laboratory scientist forever. I really loved it, but I did want to do an additional layer of clinical outcomes research and public health focused or clinical research focused work that I wasn't able to do without that training. So that's why I went and did it.
That's so cool.
Thank you.
I love that.
Thank
Good
you.
for you.
Thank you. Lisa's so nice,
Also
Louise.
say that
I
about
will do
you.
20 more podcasts with her.
Oh my goodness. Can I ask? So then is your current role, are you in a
Lovely.
hospital or are you in a research lab? Or
No.
oh,
So the plot continues, actually, the plot thickens. Sorry, Louise, if I'm derailing us here. Okay. So I was finishing up the PhD, and by this point, I've only been in the clinical or academic setting, right? I've never left the hospital. Um, and it was turning out that it was hard to find jobs at the hospital. There wasn't really an area for me if I didn't have clinical service time like my clinician colleagues, there wasn't really a role for me. And I, at the time, wasn't interested necessarily in being a laboratory director. Um, I kind of wanted to try something different. And so I looked at the School of Public Health, there wasn't really anything. And then these industry jobs kind of started popping up. And I was like, I've never ever considered industry because I've always been told that it's a bad place and you can't go there. And industry is not a good place for, there's a lot of negative bias against it. And that's kind of the field I grew up in. And so I assumed it was not good. Um, Started exploring this position called medical science liaison. And it sounded amazing. It's like we need someone that's a clinical microbiologist that has other clinical training, has to have at least a PhD, loves to do medical education, cares about diagnostics, cares about research. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Okay. And the company that I was interested, which is the one I'm at now, I was actually interested in applying for. They came to me first and asked if I was interested in being it's called a key opinion leader for them. If you're doing work in the field, that they would like to hear from you on your opinion on things or give talks or whatever. They asked if I'd be interested in doing that. And at the time, I'm like, I'm looking for a job. I'm trying to finish my PhD. I hadn't even defended yet. And I was like, oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, please pay me money to give talks and stuff. That would be amazing. Um, and while I was talking to someone about this, they're like, are you not employed? And I'm like, no, I'm trying to finish my PhD. So anyway, this ended up transitioning into a medical science liaison role with them. I started with them a couple months before I defended my PhD. The medical affairs team in the US was very small at that time. And I was the only clinical microbiologist on the team at that time. And it's grown astronomically since then, and I've moved positions since then. So I started as a medical science liaison, which is an awesome role, and I can talk about that more if there's interest. And then now I'm a field medical director. So I did not expect to go to industry. Was not on my bingo card at all, and kind of destiny sort of popped out. It kind of came up out of nowhere and has been the most amazing application of all of my favorite skills, right? Like I get to use clinical research, I get to use science communication, medical education, have to have laboratory knowledge constantly because you're very deep in diagnostics. So you have to really care about the package inserts like Louise. Um, so yeah, that's how I ended up there. And it was definitely an example of a big jump for me because it wasn't something I was expecting to do. And it felt very scary when I made that jump. But it was absolutely the best choice for me.
that is
Yeah.
such a cool sounding job. That sounds so
It's an
awesome.
awesome job.
And talk about
It's a really cool
destiny
job.
chat today. I feel like that's kind of the theme that we're going with. That's awesome. Yeah, I've never heard of that, but
Thank you.
that's incredible. And you sound so
It's a
happy
really
with
cool.
it, and that's what matters.
Yeah, it's a great job. It's very versatile for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and at least I always say this a lot, but I had the chance, starting with Andrea and moving. I don't know what they're doing at that place, but they cultivate some of the nicest people. Such a positive. You see them together. I had the pleasure of spending some time with them. They've been on the podcast and spent some time in conferences, and everyone is like so nice, and you like feel the positivity. So they're doing something right, unless they're hiding the ones that are not nice, but you're doing a good job. So,
We love Oh, we love Luis. We drag Luis like whenever we can get him at a conference. We're like, come to breakfast, come to dinner, Luis. We just love you. And then they come as guests on the podcast, and we all just love Luis. I think he's so great. It's a great group of people. I think I think it's company specific for sure, but you have to think about if you're in infectious disease diagnostics. Um, and you're representing the medical arm of the company, you have to care a lot about the things that medical laboratory scientists care about and that providers care about. You care about a patient at the end of the day. You care about how a diagnostic test is going to change their life. And so it's kind of like what you said about lab people that go into healthcare as a whole, I think, especially infectious diseases where we see the most vulnerable populations um, needing the most care oftentimes. I think you get just a really brilliant group of lovely humans most of the time. So yeah, we're very fortunate. I work with a lot of really nice people.
Definitely. So by now you have definitely talked on a lot of the how your new positions, the how they're better fit. So you have spoken about a lot of positivity. Is there anything else that you have to add about other things that you have enjoyed and what you do now? Or you can, you mentioned the lab before, maybe putting it all together in your career. Maybe if you can talk about maybe some other positive things and after leaving the lab, any other challenges. And I'll start with you, Lisa.
Yeah, I will say, um, anytime you leave something that you're used to, and I when I was thinking and considering of leaving the lab and going elsewhere, I just constantly had the thought like, what if the grass isn't greener? I know micro, I'm good at micro. Can I be okay at something else? And it was really kind of difficult and challenging to tell myself it's okay to go and try something else, and to leave what you're familiar with. It's okay to step out of your comfort zone, and I'm glad I did. And I am so grateful for the time that I had in the lab. And it was 5.5 years, which isn't too long, but it's also not too quick either. The skills that I learned when I was there, and it really built me up as a professional, which probably a lot of people don't associate being a lab tech as, building your professional skills. But, I became more organized, and I learned how to do things like policies and some of the other things. And, to kind of just develop myself professionally, which helped when I went into a different career. Stress management because it was stressful, it was a lot. Like we talked before, it's just chaotic. So I'm really grateful for everything that I did learn in the lab to help me build my career and get me where I'm at today. So again, I mean, a lot of people, we understand the stresses and how much it can really wear down a person, but there is the positives too. And, there's a light. And yeah, I will never take for granted my years that I had in the lab.
Perfect. And you, Andrew, you mentioned, especially with the position that you do, and you get to apply many skills, and there's many positive things. So, is there anything else that you had to, you want to add about positive things, and also maybe any challenges that you have faced post lab?
I would say I have a lot to say here, so I'm going to try to organize this into something coherent and not 2 hours long. But I think um, I have a soapbox. I do advocacy whenever I can for medical laboratory science, even though I'm not in the lab anymore. And the primary reason for that is because I say this all the time and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I would be absolutely no good at my job had I not worked on the bench. Um, and I'm not talking about running a lab, directing a lab. If I had not been on the bench for over 12 years and learned the skills that I learned in Clin Micro, I would not be half as good at the job that I do now. I see it every day. Medical laboratory scientists and the training and the knowledge that they have bring special skills and perspectives to alternative roles, and it's needed. It's necessary a lot of the time. So I would not have changed my trajectory or the way I entered the role that I'm in now ever in a million years. I would have absolutely gone through the lab for the length of time that I did any day of the week. I think it is the most amazing skill set. And honestly, I mean, I truly mean that. And I think anyone that works with me can tell you there is value to my clin micro knowledge and the experience I had in the lab doing the things that I've already mentioned that comes into my work every single day. Um, I would also say that I think medical laboratory scientists sometimes we get a little bit nervous to jump into um, other roles that just in general feel scary. So there's been a lot of scary moments in my career for sure. I told you about the PhD program felt very scary, literally up until the end. It was a challenge for sure. My role in industry, very scary, very different than what I was doing in the clinical lab and was a huge adjustment. Wasn't always happy days, was not always sunshine, lots of challenges there. Learning to work in industry, I think, has been interesting. You know, learning to navigate um, leaving a hospital and going to a for-profit organization that's selling a device, but that you have this very specific medical role that plays into how these things are used and understood and implemented, which is essential. And kind of trying to figure out that dance and where that all um, how that works out has been challenging for me. And then I think for me, I'm always learning, always growing. So, I'm doing like another master's certificate program now, or like if there's an area that I feel like I'm lacking, I'll always pursue. So for me, it's been really fun the last, I'd say, year and a half. I've been really, really working on continuing to develop my clinical research skills for like clinical outcomes research for diagnostics. So that's really challenging. There's a lot of stuff in that area I don't know as well as I'd like to. I know a lot from my training, and I don't know even the half of what I probably feel like I should know to continue to really do innovative things in this space. So that always feels scary and challenging. And I think sometimes I find myself saying, I'm just a lab person, like why would I know how to build a model like this or something? And the answer is that why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you know that? We can do all these things. My favorite saying is no buckets, no boxes. I don't think you should box yourself ever. Obviously, you have a job role, but I think people should try to expand beyond that as often as possible. And I know that makes me a little bit of a renegade, but I think, the skills you get from the laboratory, take them and run. The world needs a lot of that right now. And I think you're starting to find the way that healthcare is changing constantly. We really need people who can cross a lot of different groups. The microbiologist in infection prevention makes for a much better infection preventionist. The microbiologist that can think about study design methods for diagnostic tests makes for better understanding of the impact of a diagnostic test. You know what I mean? So I just think everyone should try to be as dynamic as possible and don't be afraid to take the jump. But I'd say that has felt pretty scary for me pretty much all the time. Um, I'm nervous a lot about things. People think I'm never nervous to give talks or do projects or anything. I'm very nervous all the time. But I just, if we're not learning, what are we doing? So you got to put yourself out there.
That's beautiful.
Lisa, you're so nice. I really enjoy you.
Stop it. You're so fun to hang out with.
Thanks, Louise, for like letting us be besties. This is great.
No, yeah, of course. Yeah, that's something. And if you get nervous, you really hide it well.
Thanks,
I
Louise.
had the chance
Yeah,
to, yeah,
truly.
I had the chance, to spend some time with you and watch you speak and do things like that, and you look very confident and very 100% on top of it and no nerves. So you're doing a great job. So by now we have talked about, we mentioned with the challenges, we have mentioned things like, mentioned staffing, volume. So those are obviously some things, awareness, right? Some things that could be improved in this field, both in the lab and microbiology. Anything else that comes to mind, or you think that it could be improved in this field, Lisa?
Um, you know, I think maybe if I was still in the lab, I might have a different answer now. But, when I was there, I would say, and, Andrea, this is perfect because you talked about this a little bit. But if I was still in the lab, I would have said that I wish that other departments or even just the general population had a better understanding of what, not just micro, but the lab, what they do and how it really impacts patient care. And Andrea kind of touched on how you just feel underappreciated sometimes. But again, it's just because there's not that much, knowledge about it outside of the lab. And I really love that you had your program where you had these other individuals come in and shadow and learn about what you did. And before I left the healthcare system that I was at, they started doing that where they would bring some of the physicians or nurses into the lab and tour and kind of walk through the process. And I don't know if there's more of that going on today. There definitely really wasn't when I was there, but I think that's something that I wish was a little bit better because, again, the lab is so, so important and it's so crucial to patient care. But, you have many people who don't understand it or understand how it works or why it's important. So I wish that was probably different. And I totally understand that that's the goal of, ASCP and ASM. It's kind of the goal and it's a difficult one to achieve. But, once we get there, once we get the recognition that they need, I think that would be a huge, huge positive impact for all lab techs.
Yeah, agreed. And then sometimes, unfortunately, you get like a little bit of the negative light, or why is it, the test delayed, and what's happening with this. And when it comes to micro, the whole concept of understanding what takes time. You're studying this, and it has to be incubated for 18 to 24 hours. And if for some reason you didn't, sub out your bug, then you have another day, and all those things. So, yeah, and I do wish that maybe there was like, if we had like good staffing enough where we could have like maybe some sort of exchange thing where people can come into the lab, right, and understand what we do. At the same time, maybe if we can go out and see what they do, like ID docs. And I think there's a lot of room for a lot of better communication and things like that. You don't sometimes, in the lab you feel a little like alone, and maybe all you get is that phone call, where's my thing, or I'm adding this order. And sometimes you don't see a lot of the ID physicians, or you know sometimes if you call, or you end up talking to like a secretary or an assistant or something like that. So I think there's a lot of room there.
I will say that, as my infection preventionist role, now that I do work closely with so many other departments, not just the clinical staff, but, food and nutrition and environmental services, like I notice it's not just the lab experiencing this, it's everybody. The physicians don't understand what EVS goes through. EVS doesn't understand what respiratory is going through. And it's just unfortunate that the healthcare system or the hospital, the healthcare is so divided in that way that nobody really knows what's going on in other departments. So, it's difficult. You can't sit there and ask somebody to understand every working piece of a hospital or what's going on. But, it's if everybody just had a little bit of insight, of what's going on outside of their department, I think it would be really beneficial for everybody involved.
Definitely. And what about you, Andrea? Anything that you see room for improvement?
Yeah, I think excellent points made by you both. I would love to see a lot of things. I would love to see, just to extend a little bit on what you've already said, I've talked a lot about bringing all the people to the tables, but more multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary collaboration with the lab across the board. I've talked to a lot of people about the, potential for during training programs or taking people that are actively working in the lab and having them rotate or shadow through different areas. I think that for those that are interested doing um, pathways for additional like clinical research training, specifically for very pragmatic stuff. Like in the healthcare environment we're in, we need to demonstrate value-based healthcare. If you are in the lab and you're trying to justify the use of a test, there's all sorts of data you need to do that. It may or may not be available to you. Aren't laboratorians some of the best people, if trained appropriately in that kind of design and approach to do that? That's such a great pathway for laboratorians if because they're already very methodical, um, very particular, very a lot of attention to detail. There's a lot of skill sets that lend themselves well to that kind of work, and we need it. I also, you hear a lot about some, to your earlier point, Louise, some people love to be on the bench for 30 years and do what they're doing and not change. But you hear a lot of medical laboratory scientists say they would really like a opportunity to grow in various directions more than they have now, and for job satisfaction to be kept up and for us to retain staff in our laboratories, we need to have more affordable access to conferences and events like that. How often is it that a supervisor, manager, or director gets to go to the conference, but there's not enough money for the laboratory techs that are working on the bench? And this would be so engaging and exciting for them. Trying to provide those kinds of opportunity, or at least get them to workshops, I think would be really, really great, and a great way to engage with other colleagues in the clinical sphere. Offering alternative training routes for other things that could be additive for the hospital as a whole. You've got C-suite looking for value propositions for things happening in the laboratory, kind of training, offering training routes for folks that are interested in this kind of thing, I think would be really important. And then it's a struggle because the landscape's changing so much and we see a lot of this centralization, decentralization happening all over the place. The day of having rounds in the lab every day is probably disappearing hospital by hospital, but thinking about ways to continue to get the lab as a whole involved with stewardship, with ID, clinicians, whether that's involving people on diagnostic stewardship teams, antimicrobial stewardship teams, or doing rounding in some way, even if it's virtual, I think is super important because it's just better for patient care too. Like we know this, we've seen it demonstrated over the last several years. Lots of people have done a great job about showing how these relationships actually positively benefit outcomes. So, um, I have lots of ideas. I don't if that's helpful, but I think, it's just aside from awareness and engagement, and getting more people into the role, the lab has had a history. Clinical laboratory sciences, science as a whole, and I'm sorry, I've mixed so many terms. I know we're trying to land on one term, and that's another problem we have is we use too many terms for our profession. And I know there's standardization work that's ongoing. Amanda Harrington's been really involved in that too. So that's another thing we need to fix. So people kind of refer to it as the same thing, and then we can build respect around this one thing. Um, so I've broken that rule like 100 times on this episode, and I'm so sorry, Amanda, if you're listening. I'm so sorry, and I love you. Um, but I think, thinking about how to just kind of keep up with the times. So medical laboratory science has tended to be a little more like old school and kind of stuck in our ways, I think. But technology just keeps going like this. So getting really creative about keeping up with what the science is doing, what the market's doing, what the hospital and medical systems are doing. Like, how do we adapt, the way that we use laboratorians, the way that people learn skills, the way they apply skills, how we certify, how we, I'm not the expert to speak to that, but just making sure that the lab keeps up with that, like other facets of healthcare do, I think will be very important.
And like you mentioned, with the job satisfaction and yeah, sometimes we're moving so fast that this goes back to the staffing a lot of times and the volume and a lot of times there's like barely little any time to do those other things. It's like you have your job to read your cultures and you want to get involved in other things. And over the years, that's one of the things that led to the genesis of this podcast, right? I just think I want to learn and I want to do things and I want to find things out, and you know what, I'm going to do it myself. So here I am, I'm connecting with people. And but yeah, for many years, or please, oh, teach me how to do a validation, or do teach me how to do this. And they were like, okay, no, 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 just let's find out who has a validation ball already, and then they will give me the recipe and then go cook. So it's like I'm not learning things. So it's like just a lot of those, definitely a lot of challenges that we have ahead of us. So there's the question of advice, and we have touched on, Andrea, you mentioned, right? Sometimes it can be a little scary to jump into things. you know it could also be the whole grass, being green on the other side, which, hey, it happens. I thought at one point in time I landed on a very rough patch of grass, so it wasn't as green. But from there, I learned, and it led me to what I'm doing today. So if anyone asks you for advice looking for a career in microbiology or the lab, Lisa, what would you tell them?
I think I would say that, you know, it's really easy to get buried in the stresses of the job. Whether it's an instrument not working, or, dealing with an extremely angry physician, or just trying to get all your cultures done before the shift ends, because we all know it's a miracle when it does happen. But at the end of the day, if you get into this career, you just can't forget why you're there. And, don't forget how important your job is, and everything that you do is to help the patient and for the patient to get the correct diagnosis that they're looking for and to get the care that they need to help them make or to help them get better. So I think just, at the end of the day, just know that what you're doing matters, and it's so, so important, and just to keep that in mind because, as we said, it can be crazy, it can be a lot, it can be stressful, but what you're doing is good work, and that's what matters the most.
Yeah, it's also very refreshing when we get that acknowledgement, and we don't do it for that, but we do it for our patients and do the best job we can. But it's always definitely someone, especially when someone from outside the lab, they compliment you what you're doing, or they're saying good job, or don't forget that you're doing a great job. It's very fulfilling. So, what about you, Andrea? Any advice for someone looking for a career?
Yeah, I think everything Lisa said is spot on. I would just say, I'll just add a little bit, kind of what I've already said. If you are in a laboratory career or beyond, you find something else you want to try, whatever, it doesn't really matter where you are. I would say if there's something you want to learn, um, you do not have to wait to be handed that thing to learn it. You can learn things from books, you can talk to people, there are resources all over to learn the things you want to learn. So please don't feel limited by what is, directly handed to you, if you will. I think there's so much opportunity to expand your mind outside of just what's kind of prescribed. And then I would say, like I've said before, don't be afraid to kind of go outside the box and try something a little scary. So Luis, for example, starts the podcast for fun, but has gotten so many accolades, recognition, met so many great people, getting support from like just acknowledgement and support from scientific organizations. I think that's just taking a leap of faith and doing something that's following your passion, but could certainly, who knows where that will lead. I had a great example of that when I was still in the lab. I started, I was posting case studies on formerly known as Twitter. Um, I was sharing microbiology case studies all the time, de-identified and everything, and had this little nerdy group of people on Twitter that would kind of exchange with me. And this kind of started to build up and build up. And an editor at ASM reached out, was like, "Hey, would you like to start writing for our blog that we have?" And then that, I was so excited to join that. I started doing that. I met all these amazing Clin Micro people. I really advanced in my writing skills. I learned how to be edited by someone that's a great editor, and I've been doing that for the last several years. And now there's, 35 articles with the ASM Bugs and Drugs blog. And I've learned so many great things and done so much with people and have given talks based on those, some of those articles and things. And it's just an example of like, it was just doing micro stuff I loved, and it was of interest to someone and opened up some doors and actually was very career elevating for me to get involved in that way. So just kind of saying, don't be afraid to try stuff. I mean, be ethical and be smart about it and be thoughtful. But if it's, your passion, go talk to someone, introduce yourself to someone, ask them questions, try something new. Um, in the laboratory, out of laboratory, wherever. I think the job can potentially be what you make it if you have the bandwidth to try to explore some of those things.
Yeah, well said, and as something that we repeat here in the podcast over and over, and yeah, like, as you talk about introduce yourself to someone, you have a question, you go to a talk, and you like it, you have some questions, so you see a publication, just send them an email, talk to them. That's how I get the guests. That's how I met you, Andrea, and Lisa. I saw Lisa at ID Week, giving a presentation, and then I saw her by the posters, and I talked to her about her presentation. Told her about the podcast. Andrea was posting on Twitter the same thing. I emailed her about the Breakpoints article. Hey, would you like to be a guest and things like that? She said yes. So, and here we are. So it's like a lot of great people out there that they're willing to talk to you, to share information, but just don't be scared. Take it from me. Like I am the biggest introvert on the Eastern Seaboard and probably more. Anyway, I will. But the fact that I teach, I talk to people on the podcast. So yeah, don't be afraid to get out of that comfort zone that you have. Just go for it. If people say no, that's it. I think you might be surprised. A lot of people say yes. So don't be afraid. Okay, so this question, I ask it in this series, and we all have that organism that, we consider our favorite bug. So either, right, we like something, could be a smell, could be the morphology, could be like some mechanism that it has, or something fascinates you about the organism, and you consider it your favorite bug. So, Lisa, what is your favorite bug?
This is I see Andrea's eyes light up, so I can't wait to hear what she has to say. I don't know, mine's pretty boring, but I've always really liked group A strep or strep pyogenes, but one, I just like how, it has this very typical morphology, right? It's just this little gray colony, beta hemolysis, like easy. But then you get this real mucoidy guy that shows up and you have no idea, thinking you don't think it's going to be a strep, but then you Gram-stain it and you do everything. And it's a group A strep. And it's just, it just throws you off. And I was on the reproductive bench a lot. So I saw a lot of group A's and I just loved that. But then also, on the other hand, I just think that it's an interesting bug because of and it's gross, but I mean, it can cause necrotizing fasciitis, like, that's disgusting. It's so just this little strep organism can do so much damage, among other things, like, it does so much, and I just find that to be really fascinating, and I don't know, maybe it still has a special place in my heart because in infection prevention now, we have to report any cases of necrotizing fasciitis or any sort of group A, from any surgical procedure, so it's just kind of always there with me, but that's my basic but, fun little bug that I like, I guess.
Is it always like when we think, like when we see unusual morphologies, or this is one of the things about micro, right? So we think we have a handle on things and we know it all, and then we're completely surprised. We see something, a different pattern, a different morphology. I was doing an episode about NGS, and we found out, we have a strep that's catalase positive. So it's like throwing that book that what you learn, and just, okay, you learned this, throw it away. Everything goes down. So it's definitely, it keeps us on our toes, and it's so amazing and fascinating how these things, they just make us learn, and they change and they adapt. So what about you, Andrew? What's your favorite bug?
Mine is also a strep. It's strep anginosus. If I could put it in a car freshener, I would do that. I think it smells delicious. I loved that it was always this wimpy little bug that you sometimes would smell before you'd see it on a plate. I mean, we'd be like, which of course we're not smelling our plates. Um,
Don't smell the
we
plates.
weren't we were yeah, we weren't smelling our plates. That is like, I'm sorry, I know I'm not supposed to say it, but like it's a diagnostic tool is your nose and micro. I know I'm not supposed to say it. I'm
Yes,
sorry. Pretend
100%.
I didn't say it. Everybody forget what I just said. You would happen to get a whiff sometimes of this like butterscotch odor. And then, it's talk about a wimpy looking bug, right? But in pediatrics, I was in a pediatric center. We would see it cause these terrible, like Pott's puffy tumor type, like brain abscess, giant abscesses in the sinus area. It was always kind of tricky to work up. It doesn't want to do anything. It doesn't want to go into solution well for susceptibility testing. It was just kind of a pain. And it just looked so wimpy, but could cause the craziest, problems. But it's also just this, opportunistic bug a lot of the time. It's hanging out in your normal flora. It's a friend until it's a foe. I don't know. I just think it's kind of a cool bug. I love how it smells. So it's most important.
I'm so glad you said that because I legitimately was going to give that as my answer, and then I switched, like, the last second. I was like,
I'm pretty sure we're
no."
soulmates. Yeah, we're
So
soulmates. So
I'm telling you, that butterscotch, though, it's just I mean, the butterscotch that I'm not sniffing off the plates, the
I
butterscotch
want
I'm
it in
getting
a
the whiff of,
candle
yeah.
or a car
So
freshener.
good.
I'll buy it.
You could make a killing off that.
I don't know how many people get it, but there'd be
At
a
least the
niche
micro
audience.
community.
There's a market somewhere.
That's a business idea right there. Yeah.
Let me switch yours.
Oh, mine. Pastorella.
What's your favorite?
Pastorella. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. I even
Ooh.
did an episode
Mm,
about it early on in the podcast, and I've done a couple of episodes. Yeah, it does. It's the fact that, one, that only like a couple species, they grow McConkey. So right away, others they don't, like Multocida and Canis, they don't. So immediately, it makes you think about that whole thing, right? So we have McConkey for gram-negative rods, but it doesn't grow. So that means that, you have to be careful and think, okay, just because it's not growing on Mac doesn't mean that you rule out a gram-negative rod. And then at the same time, think about, you think of Enterobacterialis and you get a variation with the indole. Um, and then with your your non-fermenters, some are oxidase positive, some are negative, but this one is both. So right away, you have both biochemicals positive, not growing on Mac. And then, thinking about that, so it makes you work on your thinking and keep your knowledge of media, of biochemicals. And then some fascinating how, it's transmitted from an animal to the person. And then after, initially, like when I was learning about Pastorella, not growing on Mac, okay, until one day I had Orogenes, which grows on Mac. So, so think about that. Not only in Orlando, someone had a pig because it's carried by pigs, and but the pig bit the person. So yeah,
It's a sleuthy
yeah.
bug. That's for sure. That's a good
But
answer.
yeah, so and then with the smells, yeah, we're not supposed, but some of the smells, they hit you and they do help you out. I mean, as I mentioned to my students, right? There's nothing like you open that incubator and maybe an alkaligenes or a myroides hits you, and it's gonna be a great day. It's not just E. coli. It's like I have some variety in my life. It's not all MRSA and E. coli. I have a nice alkaligenes in there. So
Oh,
yeah.
that's good.
Yeah, well, this has been definitely, fascinating and I have enjoyed a lot. Before we kind of start, the episodes are coming to an end. Is there anything else that you want to tell the audience or talk about?
I'd just say, thanks so much for having me as always, and always really appreciate your advocacy for the field. And I think you bringing on different perspectives and how they interact with the lab, I think is super important. It gives people a lot of additional perspective on how, the clinical lab plays a role in all these other parts of healthcare and, the benefits of pursuing a career like this. So I think it's great.
I second that. Thanks for all you do.
My pleasure. It's just, sometimes, as like you mentioned, Andrea, not all dates are not all the days are great. You do have your challenges and sometimes, overwhelm. But overall, it's just one of those things that with the work and with this that I'm doing with the podcast, and I mentioned this many times, but you're recording, you're putting your things out there. You have maybe like some sort of notion of who's listening or not, but then you send an email to someone asking him to be a guest, like what happened with Andrea, and then they turn out like they have been listening or they like what I'm doing, and then you go to a conference and hey, you're the guy from Let's Talk Micro, and so it's definitely very cool and very rewarding, and then that at least it's making an impact out there, and you know I'm gaining so much from it too. So I'm learning, meeting people. So I'm planning on doing this for a long time. So, but thank
Oh,
you.
we love to hear.
Yeah, but once again, thank you both, for accepting my invitation and spending some time here in Let's Talk Micro.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Well, there you have it. That was a great episode with Andrea Prinzi and Lisa Parlich. Great stories. And if you have a story that you think you would like to share, maybe you want to talk about your career, please, email the suggestions at letstalkmicro@outlook.com. You can find Let's Talk Micro on social media, on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Blue Sky Social at Let's Talk Micro, on X as Let's Talk Micro 1, on LinkedIn as Luis Plaza, and the email address, letstalkmicro@outlook.com. So either via social media or via email, you can send any suggestions, any feedback. They are always welcome and appreciated. And you can find the podcast on all podcast platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Good Pods. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Let's Talk Micro. And the Let's Talk Micro podcast is supported by the American Society for Microbiology. To learn more about microbes, visit asm.org. And if you are looking to learn more about antibiotics, please check out www.learnantibiotics.com and the Learn Antibiotics book, available on Amazon. These resources include cheat sheets, practice tests, games, and more, and they are being used by thousands of people worldwide and may be helpful for you or your colleagues. And these are some great resources from Dr. Timothy Gauthier, a very passionate pharmacist. And if you would like to support the podcast, you can do so via either a Venmo link or via Buy Me a Coffee, KOFI, both links available on the show notes. And that, my dear audience, is the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to this conversation with Andrea Prinzi and Lisa Parlich. As always, I enjoy bringing this information for you and sharing it with you. We all have these different career paths. There are some things that attract us to the field, and then maybe we make some changes. So hopefully these episodes can be inspiring and maybe make you think about if you are on the fence about making a move or changing something. Maybe they can inspire you. So I hope they help. As always, thank you for your support. Thank you for listening. So please continue listening. And if you're a microbe this year, let me know. Hey, stop me, say hi. As always, continue bringing that passion to what you do. It's so important. You do such a great job. So, as always, stay motivated, stay safe, and of course, continue talking micro. Until the next time. Bye.